All right, all right, all right. Well, all right, and I see we're recording. This is excellent. Thank you so much, Ashling, for that intro. So yes, again, my name is Aiden Livingston, occasional Dungeon Master, but avid Dungeons and Dragons fan. And just to give you an idea of what we're going to be tackling today, we are mostly going to tackle what is Dungeons and Dragons, how does it work, and what are some of the base mechanics without getting into the nitty-gritty details of how does each specific mechanic work. The plan for today is to give you the basic understanding and the necessary tools to get yourself started on maybe character creation or getting more interested into Dungeons and Dragons that you want to start creating your own campaigns. So in order to do this, I have created a nice little presentation for us, and we're going to go all the way to the beginning. All right. So Dungeons and Dragons, what is it? So Dungeons and Dragons is a tabletop role-playing game, and tabletop in quotes because you can play this without having to be physically in person. It is often played in groups of 3 or more, and it uses collaborative storytelling to build an adventure. The reason why it's called collaborative is because playing D&D comes down to being in one of 2 groups. There is the Dungeon Master or the Game Master. Terms go back and forth. They are often just referred to as the DM. The DM is basically the narrator. They help describe the world that all the players can interact with. They can describe the environment. They control characters and enemies that the players can interact with. And they also describe the results and consequences of players' actions. So basically, they're just the narrator. Now, the player characters, shortened to the PCs, act to create unique fantasy-based characters to play as. They interact with the world that the DM creates. They battle enemies, they can solve problems, and they seek to improve their characters and their relations through role play. In order to do this, I need to move this over here. In order to do this, there are Dungeons and Dragons comes down to these main mechanics or tools that get used. We have dice, we have character sheets. There is a little bit of math, but you can also use calculators. And there are maps, figures, and most importantly, improv. The first item that we're going to tackle is dice. It's basically how we keep it random. And dice can be used in many different situations. It all just depends on what you want to do. Maybe you're persuading a character to join you on an expedition. Maybe you need to sneak behind the enemy in order to get inside to the castle that you're trying to infiltrate. Maybe you're just fighting in combat, investigating clues, or trying to bandage a wounded ally. I'm going to share with you all in a little bit how dice are used in order to play this game. Most often, the dice that we use is a 20-sided die, often just referred to as a D20. But there are many, many more, as you are seeing in the photo on the left. We have D4s, we have D10s, D12s, and there are also D8s. And of course, there is the classic die, the D6. Now, randomness is all well and good. However, there is one thing that no matter what is going to keep the game the same in and out. And that is the character sheet. Now, that's a lot of numbers, but the reason why these numbers are here is because they help in sharing your base abilities, and this sheet helps you know what numbers you need to use after rolling dice, depending on what an encounter inquires. So, for example, if I, as a DM, ask one of my players to make a dexterity check, what they're going to do is first they're going to take their 20-sided die. They're going to roll it, just see whatever number they get. Let's see what number I get here. All right. So on the die, I got an 8. Now, the Dungeon Master, I told the player to look for their dexterity check. So they're going to go over to their stats on the left, look for the box that says dexterity, and it's the box with the 0 and the 10. I don't want the 10. I want that smaller number. So I, as the player, am going to take my 8, add that to the 0, and that's my dexterity check. Now, there are lots of more checks that can be made. There are, for example, in the long box, just right of those numbers on the left, you'll see words like deception, history, insight, and intimidation. All those skills in that box are various other checks that can be made. So if we use the example from the previous slide, if I want to bandage a wounded ally, I might be asked to do a medicine check. So I'll go to that long box, find medicine, and that's the number that I would add. I'll get into in a little bit where these numbers are coming from and how we determine them. Because we need to determine what our stats are going to be. The way that we do this, you have to make a character. So let's talk Dungeons and Dragons, class, and race. So what is a character class? Sorry about that. I forgot to take out a slide. So a character class refers to specific categories of special attributes that shape how your character navigates the world. Now, depending on what class you take, it's going to drastically affect how you navigate your situations. For example, barbarians are warriors filled with unbridled physical ability, instinct, and a rage that grants them strength. So typically, barbarians like to be going head first into battle so that they are the front line of defense. Meanwhile, rogues remain methodical, using their dexterity to sneak upon their enemies from the shadows. So rogues in fights will tend to quickly sneak in, do whatever they need to do, and quickly get out, because that's what they specialize in. As your character grows, these attributes become more powerful. And there are many classes to choose from. As much as I would like to go about describing, say, the difference between a sorcerer, a warlock, and a wizard, I don't want to keep you all here all night. So I will share with you near the end one of the resources that I use whenever there's a specific class that I want to play. When choosing your class is going to determine your stats. Although all the words that we saw on the left-hand side of the screen, like strength, dexterity, constitution, all of those affect how your character is going to play out. And you can only specialize in certain classes depending on how you prioritize your stats. These are essentially summarized descriptions of what every stat is. So strength is your strength. How physically strong are you? Dexterity, how nimble are you? And how good is your hand-eye coordination? Your constitution really comes into play whenever it comes into any ailments that you may obtain, like being able to withstand poison. So it's how tough is your skin and how much can you stomach. Intelligence and wisdom sound like they can be interchangeable, but intelligence really focuses on how much do you read. So how well read are you? It's your book smarts. It's your facts. It's your ability to research. Wisdom, however, is more so things that you know just from experience. It's the thing that's going to allow you to discern a friend from a foe. It's your street smarts. And then lastly, charisma. It's how likable and persuasive you are. The more charisma you have, most likely conversations are going to end up more in your favor. The next thing that you need to decide is what race you're going to play. And again, this is another example of there are so many races to choose from that if I were to take time to describe each one right now, we would be here all night. But again, much like as I was saying with the classes, I will share with you later on one of the resources that I use whenever I want to play a specific race. So races, much like the class, are going to affect what sort of attributes that you can have. Depending on what race you pick, you might be able to see clearly in the dark, or you might have some super strength that some other race might not have. So to go more into specific details, we have the Triton, Guardians of the Ocean Depths. You can talk to fish, breathe underwater, and grow a fishtail. You're essentially a mermaid. Or maybe you can be a Goliath. Reaching 7 to 8 feet tall and 280 to 340 pounds, they remain strong and reclusive. You are super strong and buff. It's ridiculous. And then one of the most commonly known, I would say, the dwarf. Despite their short and stout stature, they are very solid and enduring. They are bold and hardy warriors and workers of stone and metal. They are well-knowledged and very excellent fighters. So now that we've covered what picking a class and a race looks like, I'm going to demonstrate for you all not only what character creation can look like, but also I'm going to show you one of my favorite tools to use whenever I want to make a character. So down below is a website called D&D Beyond. I'm going to hop myself over to it. D&D Beyond serves as a central hub for all things that you would want to know about D&D. If you want to learn about specific games rules, or maybe you want to look into the various source books, more on that later, and or maybe you want to make a character. This is a wonderful website to use. You do have to make an account, but it will not cost you a cent to make an account. So if I go over to make a character, as you see, I already have 5 already made, but I'm going to create a new one today. So I go to create a character, and I'm going to do a quick build here where all I have to do is choose my race, choose my class. I just set a name, and then the website is going to generate my character in a way that would fit those descriptions. So I'm just going to pick a random one. Let's go elf. And as we see here, with an elf, there are 3 different types of elves that I can choose from. And that sometimes will mean that each one will have their own unique stats. So I've chosen an Eladrin elf. Now I'm going to choose my class. Let's say I want to be able to get a great lay of the land while still being able to competently manage situations that will involve direct confrontation. I'm going to play a ranger, and then I'm just going to enter in a random name. Let's call it just for fun. So I click create the character, and then automatically I'll be taken to this page where, if I view my character sheet, immediately everything is set up for me. Now, this is displayed a little differently, but all my stats are up here, automatically generated as to best serve the class I am trying to play. I have all my skills right here. On this side are going to be all the things that I'll need to keep in mind if I ever get into a fight. And these are a bunch more, and there are a bunch more things that I'm going to tackle later on in the presentation. Now, how does the game and how does Dungeons and Dragons know what numbers to use to determine stats? I'm quickly going to hop over to the character builder here, and I'm going to go over to my abilities so that I can describe this. These numbers right here, 8, 10, 12, 15, and 14. I know I didn't say those in order of lowest to highest nor left to right, but this is what's known as a standard array. There are 3 different ways that you can determine your stats in D&D. You can either use the standard array. The numbers are provided to you so that you will always have one really great stat and one really bad stat. You could also use a rolled system where you will roll dice to determine what your stats are, and then you just position them accordingly to play your class. And then there's a point buy system where you have a set amount of points that you can use to redirect to any of the stats, so that maybe you have a character that is just well balanced in all of your statistics. I don't need my phone on right now. Sorry. Or you can create a character that, again, is just really, really good at specific things and really, really bad at all the other things. Standard point array is just the default of these are your numbers, position them accordingly. And there are plenty of descriptions online or in source materials that will describe how you should prioritize your stats in order to play the class you want to play in question. Now, I'm going to hop back over to the presentation here, and I'm going to, what we are going to do is we are going to see a demonstration of how it all comes together. The way that this is going to work is I'm going to tell you all a story of a dungeon master and 2 characters, a bard and a monk. What you need to know about these two characters, the bard and the monk, is that bards are magic casters that rely on art and performance to wield their magic. A monk is a master in martial arts that uses ki to strengthen attacks. These are important distinctions to know because not only do these play well into combat, these will play into interactions that these characters have. We are going to see the Dungeon Master and these two characters navigate conversations and skill checks in a tavern they just arrived in. This is going to show all of you how the combination of classes, dice rolls, and teamwork can change how a situation plays out. So we open up with the Dungeon Master saying, "You two, an energetic bard and a contemplative monk, enter a tavern, seeking warm beds after traveling for 2 days to the town of Nightingale. Nightingale is a center point for trade routes, and this is reflected by the various shouts of merchants entering the tavern looking for drink." So again, immediately, the Dungeon Master is showing their skill set by describing the setting, as a narrator is supposed to. The monk asks, "What creatures are in the tavern right now?" So the DM asks both of them to roll a perception check. Now, the monk and the bard, they're each going to grab their d20s. They're going to look on their character sheets for their perception stats, and they're going to add those numbers together. So the monk rolled a 2 and has to add their 4 in perception. So that's a 6. The bard rolls a 17 plus a 2 in perception, so that's a 19. The DM then has to take those results and turn it into some sort of flavor text as to what is happening. And generally speaking, the higher the number, the better the outcome. So the Dungeon Master says, "Well, bard, you see various creatures, half-orcs, gnomes, dragonborn, Aarakocras, and humans all interacting with their respective selves and occasionally interacting with each other to discuss trade. While you're used to these things, to these settings, monk, you're not too used to loud noises like this because of your secluded monastery upbringing. The noise is a bit too much to focus on pointing out individual faces. It's just too overwhelming right now." So immediately we are seeing how the combination of dice rolls and the individual stats are playing into how these characters are perceiving their world. But they're not just told this and then the DM just takes over. The monk turns to the bard and says, "It's so loud in here. Do we really have to stay here?" The bard responds, "We've been traveling for 2 days and we need more money. This is the perfect place for you to rest and for me to perform." The monk responds, "Can't you just perform on the street?" And lets everyone know that the monk's character narrows his eyebrows in annoyance. The bard responds, "My character laughs and says, 'And miss out on all the merchants who would be easy to get money from?' As if! Come on. It will only be for 30 minutes and then we can walk around. I'll even get you a drink." It is sometimes up to the player's decisions, how they want to navigate coming to agreements. However, the monk responds with saying that the promise of drink raises his eyebrows, and they take a moment to recompose themselves so they can enter the tavern without being overwhelmed. They communicate this to the DM. So the DM responds, "Monk, thanks to your years of meditation, you are able to find focus in yourself and tune out a small portion of the noise. Both of you now ready to go in, enter, and can see barkeeps roaming around giving food and drink to the many patrons who have entered. One barkeep passes by you saying, just one moment, please. She moves on to drop off some food and comes back. Yes, welcome in. How can I help you? The bard responds, hello. Me and my friend here are looking to book a room and perhaps get a drink on the double. The barkeep replies, if it's room you want, go see the check-in desk. She points to the far side of the room. But if it's drink you want, you're going to have to wait because I have a bunch of others ordering. The bard asks, how much is it for one ale? The barkeep responds, 1 silver gets you a pint. The monk responds, I, growing impatient because I really want to drink, respond by saying, I'll pay you 2 gold to get us each a pint immediately, and you can keep the change. The DM then asks the monk to roll for persuasion. So the monk, as I mentioned before, is going to roll dice, go find their persuasion stat on their character sheet, and add the numbers together. The monk rolled a 13, but has to add a -1 in persuasion. So that's a 12. In response to this number, the DM is going to secretly roll a d20 to challenge this. In persuasion, you have 2 parties. So the DM needs to roll to see how the other party is going to take this persuasion. It is up to the DM's discretion whether or not to reveal the actual number on the die. But they will always tell you what the result is. So the Dungeon Master responds, she seems a bit hesitant because she's so used to first come, first serve. But because of the promise of tip up front, she says, I'll bring those drinks to the check-in desk. She takes the gold and hurries off. So without having to tell the numbers, the DM was able to let the monk know that the roll was successful, and thus the situation turned out in their favor. The monk turns to the bard and says, now you owe me 2 gold. The bard responds, says, at first I nervously chuckle, but I respond with, I have an idea, but I'll need your help. The monk responds, another one of your performances? The bard says, and you're going to help. The bard lets the DM know, I pull out my flute and I pull out my lute. Sorry, I read that wrong. And I start playing. The monk tells the DM, I begin moving around in a circle, making it bigger and bigger to make room for the bard and I. The DM responds, roll me a charisma and strength check, since you want to move people in an encouraging way. There are times where the DM can require people to make 2 checks. But again, that comes up to the DM's discretion. The bard responds, I strum my lute faster and faster as I follow behind the monk. Add 1d6 to your roll. The reason why the bard says this, and I'm recognizing that I forgot to type it in, and I apologize for this. Bards have a unique ability called Bardic Inspiration, where they are able to let players add 1d6 to their check or saving throw. Basically, it gives them a little extra buff to turn the situation in their favor. So the monk responds, for charisma, I roll a 13 plus my -1 in charisma, plus a 3 from my Bardic Inspiration, which equals 15. Remember what I was saying about math? If you can do it in your head, that's great. But there are calculators too. But a lot of it comes down to sometimes you just have to add 3 numbers together, but it can get farther than that. So the monk continues on. For strength, I roll a 12 plus 1 in my strength, which equals a 13. Now the DM is going to take these two numbers, the 15 for charisma and the 13 for strength, and is going to interpret that. And the DM says, "You're doing a good job of kindly nudging people to back up to make room for the bard. Now, bard, describe your performance." The bard responds, "I begin playing a soft jig on my lute, casting silent image to summon a copy of myself adorned in a purple sash with gold coins sewn on. As I begin to pick up the speed, my copy begins to contort, pulling the right leg to touch its head while standing on its left leg. Squatting down, the copy rolls forward, carrying the momentum to do a handstand. The copy then spreads their legs as it begins to spinning on its hand. The copy continues to do contorting acts." The DM then asks the bard to do a performance check. So the bard rolls a 19, has to add a 5 in performance, and so they get a 14. So the DM responds, "People are cheering as they see this performance. They are impressed, but they're kind of put off by the strange silence of the contorting figure before them." The monk intervenes and says, "I begin to perform fighting forms and moves, but I direct them towards the copy. My goal is to not hit the image so it can intentionally dodge." The DM then asks the monk, "Roll me dexterity so you don't hit the image. Bard, roll me another performance with advantage since you're getting help now." Now, you performance with advantage. What does that mean? With advantage, the bard is going to roll a d20 twice, and they get to use the higher number. There is also a disadvantage, and that means you roll the d20 twice, but you use the lower number. But for right now, we're focusing on the advantage. So the bard rolls a d20 twice and uses the higher number. 12 plus 5 in performance gives a 17. The monk finishes up their roll for dexterity with rolling a nat 20 on the die, which is the highest number you can get on the die, and they add their +3 in dexterity, so it's a 23. So the DM takes those two numbers and responds, "Okay, now the crowd is really into this. The incorporation of fighting and dancing into the music puts people into higher spirits. The monk is doing a stylish job to come close to hitting the copy, mixing in his traditional fighting techniques to entice and challenge the copy. The copy magnificently bends, rolls, spins, and leaps away from every attack from the monk as the tune continues to its climax. The monk responds, "I go to hit the copy." The bard responds. The copy explodes into dancing lights once the attack lands. The DM, hearing this, says, "You both do that," and the crowd goes wild after the explosive finish. People are cheering and raising drinks as money is tossed your way. You start packing up and gathering the change. You collect 96 copper and 29 silver. You then make your way over to the check-in desk as you both see 2 ales waiting for you. So, in this story, we were able to see how role-playing to the character's individual attributes by playing their characters to their individual attributes, they were able to navigate a situation where they could incorporate those attributes together, even though at first they might have clashed. Monks, being very martial arts heavy, are sometimes more appropriate for in battle, and bards, being more focused on their performances, are mostly staying towards the back and just supporting their characters. But because they found a way to work together, they were able to use all their individual skills to turn out a more profitable situation. Now, this situation could have gone completely differently. Maybe something went wrong in the performance because the bard rolled low. Well, there's a possibility that they might not have gotten the money that they have gotten. There are so many ways that Dungeons and Dragons can go when navigating any situations. This is why we use the dice. It allows us to practice that improv that I was talking about. It encourages us to think things through to see if there's something that we can do that will get us the best case scenario. Now, there is fighting as well, and it is known as turn-based combat. I know that this is a quick 180. We just went from role-playing to fighting, and it's a lot more information that's just coming your way. But again, if you save your questions for the end, I will do my best to my ability to answer all of them. So I'm using the same sheet that we saw earlier in this presentation, and character sheets are broken up into 3 sections. You have your stats on the left-hand side. In the middle is all the numbers that you're going to need for battle, and on the right is more of your personal character stuff, like their personality descriptions, their ideals. It's more flavor text for you to keep in mind to just ask yourself, how would my character think in this situation? In battle, we focus on that middle column. I'm going to quickly go through basically what everything you're going to need to know to keep track of. So first, inside the oval, we have armor class. That's up to the top left of the circle there. Armor class is a number that determines how hard are you to hit. The higher the number, the less likely you are to get hit. There is, just off to the right of that, initiative. When playing in turn-based combat, it is important to determine in what order people are going to be attacking. This is where initiative comes in. When battle starts, everyone rolls, again, a d20. Dungeons and Dragons just centers around the d20. It is our holy relic. So everyone at the table is going to roll their d20s, and they're going to look for their initiative number. They add that number to their roll, and then they have to share that with the DM. The DM combines all of those initiative rolls in order to determine who gets to go first, and then who follows after, and after, and after, and after. After that, just below that, we have hit points. It's your health. You have hit dice, which is just a little bit lower, little below that, and it's used to heal outside of combat. Off to the right of your hit dice, there are what's known as death saves. If your health reaches 0, you have to start rolling a d20 again to see if you can recover. Depending on what numbers you get is going to determine if you succeed or if you fail. And then just below that is the list of all weapons or maybe special spells that you might have and their individual attack bonuses and damage types. Again, this is a lot more, this is information that at first sounds like a lot to keep track of, but the best part about a collaborative game is that you can always work together to just kindly remind each other. It's that if someone asks, where is my initiative again? You can help each other find it. Or if someone is wondering what they have to add, you can work together to figure that out. This next part of the presentation is just things that best help people collaborate together in an improv setting. At the end of the day, flexibility in D&D is most important for both players and DMs. This is because people's play styles are different. Not every dungeon master is going to play the same way. Not every player character is going to play the same way. It is really important early on that you have that conversation of what everyone is going to want out of a campaign. It's important to ask what sort of story a dungeon master wants to tell. And it's important to ask what players want to experience in their game. When it comes to role-playing or experimenting with your characters, I encourage everyone to have courage before confidence. I say courage because courage is what you use in order to do something that you have never done before. Confidence you build from doing the same thing over and over again. If it's your first time playing D&D, you're probably going to experience a session where you're going to be relying more on courage than confidence. But as you play more and more, you're going to develop that confidence. And then it's just a matter of, okay, I know what my character can do now. How can we push it further? Next, artist interpretation. It's very, very important. As we were seeing in the story that I read for all of you, it's not just as simple as the player tells what the number is and the DM just says, you succeed or you fail, you do it, you don't do it. It is important to maintain immersion by describing what those numbers mean. It is also important to communicate and seek to be consistent. This goes for both dungeon masters and players. There are going to be times where a dungeon master or a player might forget a specific rule. If you forget about the rule in the moment, but then you find out later that you did remember it wrong, that's okay. It's okay if you messed up. What's important is planning out how you're going to move forward. I have had campaigns where I've had a player remind me 30 minutes later after I've already described a result of an action that the action should have gone a different way. And the best that I tell everyone is, okay, we're going to keep this in mind for the future because we're already too far to deal with it. It's okay if someone wants to do something and then immediately you're telling them you can't do that because of this mechanic. That's still okay. You caught it in the moment, so now you can remedy it. But there are times where it's just best to just move on and remember it for next time. As I already said, flavor text is very important. And planning out what everyone wants, again, if you talk very early on what everyone wants to do, you're going to have a much better session because now you can cater sessions to everyone. Now, the biggest question, how affordable is D&D? I'm really happy that I get to be the bearer of good news because if you play your cards right, it's completely free. The reason why I say this is, as someone who is like the occasional dungeon master, I cannot deny there are many, many resources out there for everyone to get that can really get them started on D&D. Helen showed us one of the resources earlier. It was a box called the Essentials Kit. That is a great resource because it comes with everything that a new player or a new dungeon master might want to have physically in order to get started. But it doesn't just stop there. I'm going to have to quit the share screen for this one so that I can show everyone. What I have in my hand here is the Player's Handbook. This was essentially one of the first books that came out when Dungeons and Dragons was getting a sort of revitalization. A lot of the mechanics were being refined. This was one of the first books that came out, and it describes everything in a lot more detail about all the things that I have talked to you today. I'm kind of curious, who would like to guess how much this costs? Just this one book. Adam, I see your hand. Ooh, let's see if I can unmute you here. Adam, do you want to unmute yourself there? Or maybe Adam, why don't you message in the group chat how much you think this book is worth? It may surprise you. It may surprise you.
I'm seeing, okay.
About, yep, there it is. Okay, yeah. So we have the guess of 30 pounds. That's not too far off, but it's actually a little bit higher. This costs about 50 quid, about 50 euro, just this one book. But this isn't the only book, because there is much, much more to get. These are just the 3 that I have. There are monster manuals, a dungeon master's manual. The list goes on and on. These books are expensive. I'm not going to lie. They add up really quickly. But the best part about D&D is its community on the internet. All the things that you could possibly want to know from this, you can easily learn online. I'm going to go back and so it does add up, and there are plenty of other things that Dungeons and Dragons has that, like, it just adds up eventually. Like buying customizable maps that you can just dry erase maps that you could just draw on the fly. It adds up. Getting figurines for your characters, it adds up. But again, there are so many resources online, and I'm going to share with you some of my favorite ones in a bit, that you can have all your questions answered and everything streamlined. Now, speaking of resources, and boop. So let's talk about some of these resources. So these are the free and affordable. I say affordable because in these ones where you can buy stuff, you can really get specific as to what you want. So instead of buying an entire book, maybe you just want a specific race in that book. You can just you can just pay for that specific race or that specific class. The list goes on. So the first one I already showed you, D&D Beyond. As I said, it has a character builder, and it can teach you all the different rules about how to play all these different classes. And this is just for free. Let's say, okay, Artificer, bad example. I apologize. let's try this one. So if I want to play a barbarian, I can go to the barbarian description. And to use Artificer as an example, remember what I said, affordable? Well, this Tasha's Cauldron of Everything is the book that the Artificer class is in. But if you don't want to buy the entire book and you just want the class itself, you can go into specifically choosing what you want from that book. This will just allow you to cater to what you want out of a book. And say you do want the entire book, the option is there. But again, there are enough resources online that if you want to play a specific class, all I have to do is Artificer and type in D&D, and there are resources that will just tell me immediately how I have to play, how I can play as an Artificer without having to spend anything. Another useful tool is the official Dungeons and Dragons website, dnd.wizards.com. And again, it's just a place to get specific resources that you want, or maybe learn specific ways of play without having to buy anything. Now, another one of my favorite tools to use is Roll20. Roll20 is useful because what I can do is I can generate maps online that I can use to keep track of where characters are located in case we're in the middle of combat. So I'll show you an example here of, this was a game that I was a part of a couple months back. This was back in May of 2020. And my Dungeon Master uses this program all the time. And so he was able to make a specific map where it kept track of where all our characters were. And so this was my character over here. And I believe I was over at like a Goliath fighting pit in this city because we needed a safe voyage back home. But my character was bored, so they just wanted to go off and have a little bit of sport. So Roll20 is another one of those great resources where it doesn't cost a cent. And by just investing time to learn how to use it and think outside of the box, you can solve the issue that would otherwise require you to spend a little bit of cash. And if I'm remembering correctly, one last thing. And it's important that I share this one too. If you are looking to be a runner of Dungeons and Dragons, so you want to be a DM, there are always two routes that you can go as a DM. I know DMs who they will go online to find a campaign that is already made, something that they will not have to worry about generating specific encounters or locations because it's all laid out for them. I know dungeon masters who will go out of their way to create their own world, their own encounters, their own monsters, their own tools, their own characters, their own everything. The best part about D&D, as I said, is the community, where if you want to just work with people to create specific ideas, there are plenty of forums where you can talk with experienced DMs or experienced players to start getting into that. Or, as I mentioned before, there are a lot of books in D&D, and this is an example of a campaign book where everything is already laid out. So a campaign is just a word for when a group of people are playing Dungeons and Dragons together and they're playing it for multiple sessions. And a session is basically where people just sit down for a couple hours to play D&D. So this entire book is an entire campaign. So a lot of my work to create encounters, to create the story, it's already done. All I have to do is the bit that I struggle at, reading. But if you can get past that, you can create an amazing time for all your players. But again, it's one of those moments where you got to start weighing with yourself, how willing are you to put money into this hobby? Because again, there are plenty of ways to engage in D&D without having to spend a cent. And there are also plenty of ways to play D&D where if you really just want to know everything and have it ready on the fly, there are books. And that's where I would say the books are most important. If you want to have the information ready and on hand because you need to remember a specific mechanic, instead of having to take time to get on your computer, you can then just open up a book. But again, there are plenty of ways to play this game without having to spend anything. So that's Dungeons and Dragons. And
Awesome.
so at this point, that is it for today. That's it on my part of the specifics of things you need to know right away in order to understand what D&D is and how we make it all happen.
Awesome, Aiden. Thank you so much. And like perfectly timed, because it is like literally 8 o'clock. So you must have practiced that like 10 times. That's pretty incredible. But yeah.
you remember everyone where Aisling, to respond to that. Remember what I was saying where improv is everything?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that was the entire presentation.
You're improvising everything. And like,
flexibility is key.
Yeah, awesome. And like, I think obviously you covered a lot in that, and there's a lot to Dungeons and Dragons, so it can be a little bit overwhelming. But like for everyone in who's listening, like hands up if you've ever played like Pokemon. Hands up if you've ever played Minecraft, or so like if you can remember when you start those games, there's a lot to learn. But if you're really interested in it, you start reading about it and you go online and you watch videos about it. So don't be scared if you're going like, God, there's a lot in this game. I don't know if I'm going to be able to play. If you start off really simple and do a little bit of research and read into things. And so I saw somebody saying World of Warcraft. That's another game that's pretty complicated, you know? So if you're interested in it, you're going to find it a lot of fun to do the research and learn all about it. Would you say that's the same, Aiden?
That is exactly it.
That's it.
The best part about Dungeons and Dragons is how customizable it is. Because while there are strict rules, how you incorporate those rules into your game is what makes it so special.
That's it. So like, you know, it's okay to feel a little bit nervous at the beginning, but when you're playing with more experienced players, they will teach you. Okay, I have a question. So there was a question from Adam Tyberski. Yes. I'm just gonna see if I can unmute Adam so he can ask. Go ahead.
Yeah, I've little questions here.
Yes.
What does how much can you stomach mean?
How much you can stomach is a phrase for let's say you decide to take a bold risk and the DM tells you that there's some food before me but I do not know whether or not it is poisonous. And now let's say that my character is the kind where they are not going to take the time to figure out what kind of plant it is. They are just going to eat it right away. Now let's say that the food turns out to actually be poisonous. How much I can stomach is a phrase for, am I going to be able to tolerate the poison? Am I going to be able to keep my food down, basically? So it's
So better
basic.
immune system.
Exactly.
Cool.
And
How much can you fend off specific ailments,
yeah.
essentially?
And what is the better set to start with? The D&D starter set or the D&D essential sets?
That's a good question. I'm trying to remember what's specifically in each box. Because if I'm remembering correctly, the D&D starter kit comes with it's another example where a campaign is laid out for you. So I would say that if you want to not only become a player, but also to start looking into being a DM, I would say go the starter set route, because you're going to have a campaign already prepped for you. And so a lot of the work to create a story is already done. But
Okay.
if even then, when it comes to essentials, I cannot emphasize enough that there are enough resources online that are completely free, where anything that the essentials kit or the starter set would give you in order to start playing, there are plenty of resources online for free that can tell you the exact same thing without having to spend a cent.
Okay. And what are the die cast figures for? You know, the metal things you get in the boosters and all that. Do you use those for playing or?
Metal things you get in the boosters.
You know the little metal figures like they have on sale in Dungeons and Donuts, Aiden?
Yes. Okay. I can tell you exactly what those are about. So let's say Adam, you, Ashling, Helen, Michael, and well, let's just say everyone here is gathered together in one room, and we're all around a table, and in the middle is a map that the Dungeon Master has drawn before us. Those figures are important in letting everyone in the room know where our character is specifically positioned. So it literally just acts as a placeholder and a location marker. And the best part about all the little figures is that you can always find a figure that really speaks to what your character is, because they'll have figures that are tieflings, they'll have figures that are human, they'll have figures that look like a sorcerer spell in the middle of casting a spell, and they'll have figures of monks that have a bow staff. So that's what those are for. I see Carl Finn has a hand up.
Okay, let me just find Carl. Okay, go for it. If you can unmute yourself there, Carl, we'll hear your. Go for it.
So is it like a video game or is it like a board game?
Good. Okay. So what you're asking is it more of a game that you just play on the table and what you see is what you get, or is it something that really shows you what's going on? Am I hearing you correctly?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. Dungeons and Dragons is what's known as theater of the mind.
Mhm.
While while all the mechanics are what just takes place on the table. So, like, say, you have a dry erase map laid before you, and you have your characters all positioned across that map so that you know where everyone is. The table's only going to show you what is on the table. But what's important as the DM is to describe in as much detail as possible what can't be seen with our eyes alone. So that's where the imagination comes in, where everyone just starts thinking about what they're seeing. They start thinking about the castle that is off in the distance, or the town that they're walking through, or the deepest of caverns on their way to the dragon. Like that. So it's a little bit of theater of the mind and the board game. It's a mix of both. Does that
And-
make sense?
Yeah, and I've heard other people call it role-playing games or RPGs.
Yes.
So a lot of it is, about having a character, and instead of doing things, I'm not thinking like, what would Aisling do? I'm
Yeah.
thinking like, what would my character do in this situation?
Mhm.
So it's basically like grown up imagination time. So lots of fun, and you make a story as you go along. I see other hands up. Will we go to Deirdre? I think I saw your hand up. I'm going to ask you to unmute yourself or type, but whatever you're most comfortable with.
Deirdre.
When can we start playing?
That's I hear the question a lot, Aiden. When can we start playing? So good question, everyone. So the good news is we are hoping to start playing Dungeons and Dragons. Obviously, because of COVID, we can't play in person yet, but that's not going to stop us. We're going to try and start playing virtually. So we have a lot of people interested. So I think at the moment we have 21 people in the chat. So obviously we can't play a game with 21 people. So we might have to set up 3 or 4 different groups of people who are interested. And it's my job to find some dungeon masters. So what I'm going to do is find some dungeon masters and we might separate them. So I see a suggestion there from Ellie. We might separate by age groups. We might separate by experience level or something like that. But yeah, I think I'm going to have a look when I go back to work on Monday and start looking for some DMs to help out and get started. And I also want to give a shout out to Matthew. Matthew was really helpful and answered loads of questions in the chat while you were speaking, Aiden.
Oh my goodness, that's awesome.
So thanks a million, Matthew. Like I think you answered a lot of questions that people had. Like Aiden didn't even have to answer them, which is great. So there's a couple of people in the chat, Aiden's in, that they've DM'd before and they might be willing to get involved. And I think next week, or if you're available, Aiden, we might maybe do like a practice game or a run through or something along those lines to show people what a game is like.
Yeah. So we'll have something more interactive so that we can really get into the really show how it all comes together, because again, today was just mostly for information.
Awesome. I see you. Do you have time for a few more questions?
Yeah. I got plenty of time. It's only like 3 o'clock where I am.
Oh yeah. Just in case everyone doesn't know, Aiden is calling us from all the way in the United States of America, and you can see it's light outside his window. There's a big lake behind him. It's very cool. So we'll take 3 more questions, and then what we'll do is we're going to say goodnight. And I would urge you all to go online, do a bit of your research, do a bit of research, look at developing your character if that's something that you want to do. So I see this person here is called CAT. I'm going to ask you to unmute. I don't know if it's Cat or CAT. Hi.
Both.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi.
Would you like to ask a question?
Well, I was actually going to ask like an answer-ish thing.
Cool. Go ahead.
Yeah.
we could use my dad because he's actually doing something with role playing. He always does it on like Saturday, Friday, Sunday nights. He's a dungeon master kind of person.
That is so
Oh my
cool.
goodness, that would be
Kat,
so great.
will you ask your dad to send me an
And
email?
he's also done some books.
Oh, wow. So he's really imaginative and creative.
Yeah.
Cool. So will you ask your dad to send me an email and maybe I can ask him if he'll DM with us? Awesome. Okay. And I see Peter Madden, you have a question as well.
What do the dice regarding the D20?
What does D20 mean, Aiden? I think, am I right
Right.
in saying
Yep,
D
no
means
worries.
dice? Is that
Yeah.
what it's for? Yeah.
Yeah.
No.
D stands for the dice, and then the number afterward describes how many sides that there are. So the D20 is the 20-sided dice. But then the D6, like, I'm pretty sure everyone, the D6 is the most commonly known die, where it just has 6 sides. So that's what's meant by it, Peter.
Can
Thank
you
you for asking.
Can you put it up close to the screen again,
Oh,
Aiden?
yeah.
And show us all the sides. So it's different than a normal dice. Oh, and Peter said, what do you use the other ones for? So why
Oh.
would you use a D6 or a D12?
Okay. Yeah. So an example. So all the other dice are pretty much used for trying to determine how powerful a certain action is. So let's say if I want to, I don't know, cast Fireball, for example, and I would first roll my D20 because I need to see if I'm going to be able to cast it and do damage. But then afterwards, let's say I'm asked to roll 5 D6. So I'm going to find, I'm going to grab my D6 if I only have one, and I'm going to roll it 5 times, or I'm just going to grab a handful of 5 D6 and just roll them all at once. So the D6 is sometimes used in calculating damage, along with the D4 and the D12, or maybe you can use it to determine like what percentage of winnings that a party gets, because there are what's known as the D10 and the D100. So, but the D100 doesn't have 100 sides. It's just the D10, but all the numbers have an extra 0 behind it. And it's just useful in trying to determine like how many things do these people find, how many enemies are going to be before them, and like there's just the possibilities of what the other die are used for is endless.
Thanks, Aiden. That's awesome.
Sorry, that was a very long one.
No, that's fine.
But thank you for asking, Peter. That's a really good question.
Thanks a million. So one last question. So Paul Riley, if you would like to unmute yourself and ask a question.
Yeah, I was gonna ask, when are we going to get all the stuff like to play the game, like a starting kit and the other stuff?
Where did you say?
Where can I find where can I get it? Where can I buy it in?
Right. So, Dungeons and Donuts in Galway is a lovely place, for example. So, so they have books like the Player's Handbook and the Dungeon Master's Guide, and like the Tasha's Cauldron of Everything book that I showed earlier online. But that's again, if you want something a little more physical, like that you can hold in your hand. Otherwise, things like books, you can easily buy that online so that you have a PDF version instead. Otherwise, it's any store where you would find tabletop games, essentially. You should be able to find D&D there as well.
Awesome. And we're not sponsored by Dungeons and Dragons, so
No.
We're not encouraging you to buy anything if you don't need it. But like any hobby, maybe if you start with something, you can use the free resources, and if you really love it, you can invest more money into it. But yeah,
Yes.
that brings us to the end of the evening. Aiden, that was awesome and really helpful. And as someone who's only played D&D once, I've learned a lot from that, and like I would feel a little bit more confident starting a game now. I just want to say to everyone, anyone who is under 18, be super careful if you are using any of the online resources.
Yes.
There are a lot of people out there, like strangers, who we don't know. So even though it can be tempting to play with strangers, never do it without your parents' supervision or their permission. So yeah, there's plenty of time to start playing, you know, with people internationally when you turn 18, and just be careful in general. But yeah, I think we're going to try and create a lovely, like, safe, super fun place to play the game. And hopefully we'll see you next week at the same time at 7 o'clock. And I have a lot of work to do between now and then, Aiden. I'm going to have to find all the DMs in Galway.
And I'm going to have to start writing something up here.
All right, everyone, thank you so much. This was so much fun seeing you all. It was like,
thank you so much, everyone, for your
this
wonderful
is the most
interest.
people I've seen in probably 6 months. So that was really exciting. But bye, everyone. And thank you for being super cool and respectful and friendly and welcoming in the chat. You all guys are all awesome. And yeah, have a great weekend. Thanks, Aiden.
Thank you so much, everyone, for tuning in. I really appreciate it.